Jane Chang. I am a graduate student of ITS. I'm also the president of TransOp, which is the Transportation Graduate Students Organizing Committee. Welcome to the first ITS seminar of the semester. It's a great pleasure to see many of you here. Today, the seminar is about an invention. It is one of the greatest inventions of our times in the realm of transportation. It has benefited millions of users, tons of researchers, and probably a lot of app developers out there. It is the foundation of big data research in transportation, which a lot of us are engaged in right now. It is the language in which transportation users and experts communicate in. It is a protocol for building up the modern transportation information systems. And it is a very succinct and innovative network representation. And with that great honor, I introduce GTFS and the inventor, Chris Harrelson. Before we jump into the presentation, I have to introduce him a little bit. He has a long history with UC Berkeley. He was actually an undergrad and a PhD student from UC Berkeley in the computer science department, and he left in 2004 to join Google as a software engineer. He founded a project which added public transportation research to Google Maps, and he helped shaping GTFS interchange format for transit data that is now used in many, many applications. And a fun fact, the picture in the poster is Chris in the new double-decker bus on AC Transit FX. Now, let us welcome Chris Howard.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Hopefully I will have something interesting to say that you will find interesting. I haven't given this talk before, and I actually have not been working on the transit effort for quite a while. I was there and I was running it for 3 or 4 years, and then I actually moved on to new projects. My latest thing is Chrome, and helping the web succeed in the same way that GTFS, I hope, has succeeded in transportation. So I have a 3-part story to tell that might start out sounding a little obscure, but I think it does come around to the topics of GTFS and transportation and kind of what it means to us and what it meant to me and why I did this project in the first place. Okay, so part 1, some musings on the past. Part 2 is something about my story. And part 3, some more musings and maybe some predictions for the future that you could think about if you agree with or disagree with, and what you might do about them if you agree. Okay, so here's some things I could come up with that are innovations in transportation going back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. One of the first ones was the steam engine. This picture on the left is apparently, I'm not really an expert in any of this. I did a bunch of Wikipedia searching earlier today. I mean, I've heard a lot of the stories, but some of these details that I found during my research are actually new to me, and I'll point them out as I go. So the thing on the left is a picture that's kind of interesting. It's in a museum. The one on the right, I'm familiar with. It'll be a theme that I come back to repeatedly in this talk, kind of many times actually, that it's kind of a cool machine, but that is a lot of smoke. That is a lot of smoke, and that is causing a lot of problems for that neighborhood. This is actually a train in Germany, like a fun historical train in Germany, I think. So that was in like the late 17th century, early 18th century that the steam engine was invented and then optimized and perfected and deployed, and of course had a gigantic effect on the world, making it faster and easier to transport things and people from place to place. Later on in the 19th century came electricity. And the first reliable DC motor, apparently, was invented in about 1884 by a guy named Sprague, who I believe worked with Edison. Again, this is something that maybe I learned at some point, but I had forgotten it since then. So this is apparently a picture of one of the first motors and a diagram of it. And very soon afterwards, I was surprised to find in the Wikipedia article immediately led to transportation innovations that are new. So the first streetcar in the world, apparently, was launched by this Sprague company in Richmond, Virginia in 1886 or 80. And then soon thereafter, the same technology was used to invent the modern elevator. So within a few years, we had a huge leap forward in two things, or three things maybe. One is miniaturization of the steam engine that powered trains. And the second is electrification. And electrification allows you to separate the place that you create the smoke from the place that you use the transport. Because you wouldn't want these giant trains with weird smokestacks constantly polluting your streets in the middle of a giant city. Whereas electricity, if the smokestack was far away, it's okay. Okay, so, but then the smokestacks came back, and now with the invention after that, the smokestack was reintegrated with the device itself, creating its own power. It's otherwise known as the internal combustion engine, which we know and love and powers automobiles today, except for other ones that are coming on the market that I'll talk about later. The internal combustion engine was revolutionary in that, it allowed everyone to have their own train and drive their train wherever they want. And it created a lot less smoke than the original thing, but of course it did create some. And while it created less pollution, if you add them all together, maybe it creates more. And it creates a different problem, which is that if everybody has their own train and they're driving around wherever they need to go, then you quickly get into problems of scale. You probably all know where this particular picture was taken. I believe it's ironically from the pedestrian bridge in Berkeley, because that's a good place to take pictures without getting run over by a car. So that's interesting. Cars proliferate, everybody has one. That means 6 billion people have a car. So then there came airplanes, of course, and then airplanes led to jet engines, which was yet another revolution in transportation that you can get from place to place, has different form factors than a car. And then, apparently it was in about 1991 that the lithium-ion battery was invented. Batteries already existed, but there was a new type of battery that, I think this is not actually a picture of the original one, this is just a particular one. It was launched by Sony and another company together. And the interesting thing about this battery is that it's perhaps one of the last things of the 20th century preceding the importance of computers and information towards transportation as opposed to the technology of the engine itself. So this battery ended up becoming extremely crucial for electric cars as well as cell phones, which have themselves an intimate connection to today's transportation networks. So again, all these technologies, breakthroughs, everything, they come together, they create a world like this. A world that you and I think, were born with. We never saw a world before this. At least people my age never saw a world before this. We lived in worlds with large freeways. We often lived in a suburb that was made possible by the car, where everyone could have some more space to themselves. But on the other hand, the very structure of the city relied upon the complete reliance upon a particular technology of transportation. So I grew up in a suburb like this, not too far away in San Ramon. So I know what living there is like. It's pretty nice, all things being equal. But it's also a bit uniform, and to me it didn't feel sustainable. So I started to have these feelings from my youth about sustainability and connection and the advantages of a city over a suburb. And so these things built inside me, and that's how the story is connecting back to me. It does connect to me. So here's another one of a particular freeway interchange that's pretty famous in the East Bay. Okay, so my talk was actually about business and the public sphere together, creating something and influencing each other. It wasn't just about a series of inventions. So the world wasn't just a sequence of inventions and then things happened. There were many things that happened along the way where society responded to itself to try and compensate for things it didn't like about the explosion of some new technology, or to try and help augment that technology in ways that it felt that that technology would improve the lives of everybody. For example, the suburb was actually in many ways an intentional effort by not just business but the government and local societies as a whole to create a new type of living experience that was viewed to be superior to the previous one. So one is like, if you have trains, you can't just build them willy-nilly. That actually did happen in the very beginning. They were kind of built willy-nilly, and then everyone realized you need to standardize the distance between the rails. You probably should have a timetable. You should have safety measures to make sure that the trains don't run into each other and kill everybody. One anecdote I've heard about safety is, it's probably true in trains too, but I've heard it about the fire code, that every page in the fire code is a record of a death. And they only add a new thing when some bad thing happens that leads to that new rule. So these days, everything is regulated. The subway was arguably a response to the chaos introduced by various forms of technology or absence thereof, and trying to integrate those into a highly dense city where you can't just tear down the city and turn everything into cul-de-sacs. You have to deal with the city as it is, more or less. Well, in this country, people did try to, in some cases, tear down the cities, but for the most part, you can't do that. And of course, in the United States, there was a grand project initiated by the federal government in the 50s that built out a highway system that looks a lot like that rail system that we just saw in Europe, except that it uses the internal combustion engine instead of trains. Leading to this, and this, and this, and this. This is the well-known chart, or one of the well-known charts about how the world is getting warmer, because it turns out we can't just belch that smoke or some equivalent form that you can't see, but it's still bad for everybody forever without exceeding the carrying capacity of the Earth. And so we have to deal with this problem as well. Okay, so now that leads to me. This is sort of like, to some extent, a backstory of the motivations behind why I care about this area, and how I felt coming into my arrival at Google. So I graduated from UC Berkeley with my PhD, like was mentioned earlier, in 2004. And I immediately went to Google as a software engineer. I really liked Google as a company. I in particular liked the mission of the company. I hope it's readable. It says, to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Everyone can access the information, and it's useful to them to accomplish the things they want to do. Embedded in this statement is something about information makes you smarter, makes you free, makes you make better decisions, makes the world a better place. That's the reason why this is the mission of Google. It's not that we're obsessive compulsive. It's that information, Google believes that information has an intrinsically positive effect on society and culture. And by the way, I'm not speaking for Google today. I'm just here as a person. I do work for Google, but just stating Google's mission and my opinion about it. So I joined Google in 2004. This product, Google Maps, didn't exist yet, actually. It wasn't launched until 2005. And while I was there in 2004, I had a chance to meet people who were building this product. And I had like some vague ideas that, when I was at Berkeley, for example, when I actually first showed up at Berkeley, they had just introduced a new program. I believe they called it Class Pass, which is a free bus pass for every student. And I think they still have it, right? They still have this thing. It started in about 1995, I think maybe even the year I joined. And they gave a bus pass to everyone and said, great, you can go ride Ace and Trends as much as you want and have fun. But back then, actually figuring out where the buses went and what this all was about was not so easy. Especially you come from the suburbs, you don't really hardly even know what a bus is or what cities are like. My city had 2 bus lines, and one of them I took to school, but for some reason that doesn't make any sense. It stopped dropping off half a mile from school, even though the only people who rode the bus were going to school. So then I came to Berkeley. We had Class Pass. We're like, great, let's like, I don't know how to use this thing, so maybe we didn't. A lot of times we were just like, I don't know, it's too annoying to get out my cash. There was no Clipper card back then. It's just like, get out your $1.25 or whatever it was. So we wouldn't necessarily write it, even though it was convenient. In part because of technology, and in part because of lack of awareness and understanding of it. So, so I kind of immediately grasped upon this idea that it was actually already annoying to me that that maps were incomplete. At the time, there was already a digital map revolution that had happened. MapQuest and Yahoo Maps, their online maps were already a thing, and it had been ever since the dot-com era in the late 90s. But those maps were, in my opinion, incomplete. They didn't show you where the sidewalk was. They didn't show you where it was safe to ride your bike. They didn't show you where the bus stop was, and they often didn't even show you where the subway station was, which is kind of ridiculous because in a big city, the subway is usually a pretty important thing. Sometimes they did, but quite often they did not. And so I wanted to fix that problem. It seemed like a straight-up addition to Google's mission of making the world's information universally accessible and useful. And in fact, the mission of Google Maps, perhaps never stated explicitly, is make the world's geographic information universally accessible and useful. And of course, the location of all those things I just mentioned are geographical information bits. The problem is, where do you get this data? Where do you get it? How did they even make the maps in the first place? The data that drove the original Google Maps came from other companies that had, through other means, created this data. For example, the USGS collects data on where roads are to some extent. There's a ecosystem of companies that have been built up. A lot of those companies are no longer with us, but they were at the time still around. They had, in the 20th century, built up information for mapping and trip planning. But of course, the public transit agencies existed. They ran their buses, they ran their trains, they ran their light rail. They knew where their bus stop was, presumably. They did, they pretty much knew. They had it in a database. They had a schema for that database. The relational databases had been around since the 80s. They knew all these things. They ran their operations. They scheduled their drivers. They knew when the trips were coming. They printed their PDFs. But it wasn't in a format that was able to be consumed and put into Google Maps. So just getting that access to that database dump was the first task. So we wanted to make Google Transit. At the time, we didn't have a name for it, but that was what it ended up becoming. And I wanted to build this thing. I wanted to build it because I wanted transit data to be on the map. I wanted people to make an informed decision about their transportation choices. I wanted to be able to make it easier for myself to ride the bus, take the train, and to be able to do that when I go to other cities as well, not just the local city, or even in a foreign country where I don't speak the language. So, so I and several other people, we all thought it was cool. This is a great idea. Let's do it. Now, where do we get the data? We started out by doing the typical, the standard, the original Google approach. It's not the standard Google approach. It's the original approach of Google was like scrape the whole web and figure out some things about answers to people's questions and then profit from that. That was the original approach, and that's still the approach of Google search for the most part. So we tried that. We went and we wrote programs that would scrape the PDFs from AC Transit and BART and all these things. And the information, if you squinted, it was sort of tabular. If you exported it to a file, then you could. But the thing is, it was never very reliable because the data was not meant for that sort of consumption. It wasn't cross-referenced. It wasn't deduplicated. The formatting was sometimes inconsistent because it was meant for presentation and delivery to the writer so they could have a reference. So, so in fact, the co-founders of this product, the founder of this project was not Google. It was actually, there were two co-founders of Google Transit. In parallel with us trying to figure out how to get this data and wanting it to be on the map, Google Maps launched. So the initial Google Maps did not have any transit information on it. That was early 2005. Within months of that happening, the innovative people at TriMet saw it and immediately came to the same conclusion I did, that this is a unique opportunity to get that information onto the map so that people can make better decisions for themselves. So if you don't know what TriMet is, it's the Public Transit Agency of Portland, Oregon. So it was a merging of Portlandia, and that was a joke, you're supposed to laugh. You guys don't know Portlandia? Are you too young for that? Some people know about it, okay. Portland is the most progressive city in America, and this is proof. It's not just in a TV show, it's for real. Those people are really cool and really innovative, and I really love them. So they came and they actually called all their contacts and said, like, I need to get through to Google. I want to give them my data. Please connect them. They connected to me. Within 2 days, they had given us a data dump of a zip file containing CSV records of the stops, the trip names, the route names, and the timetables of each of their things. So if you ever use GTFS, something is going to start sounding pretty familiar. Okay, so we wanted to complete the map, like I said. We wanted to provide a useful service, but for me personally, the most important thing is to level the playing field and encourage public transportation when possible. So, so after we launched, we actually launched the project with just one city, Portland, Oregon, and it was launched as part of a thing called Google Labs, which was a way of Google, at the time, Google had this system of adding beta versions of new ideas that were not yet fully baked in order to get feedback and everything from the public, and then maybe we would turn it into a full-fledged project. So Google Transit was one of them. There was a trip planner that looked a lot like Google Maps, and you could say A and B, and it would tell you, this is the bus or the light rail you should take in Portland, Oregon. And if you don't live in Portland, then please come back later, site under progress. So we, of course, wanted to expand, and we immediately got interest from other cities saying, like, oh, would you like our data dump? And we're like, okay, I guess. And then they gave us data dumps, and they were all different formats, and this is not going to scale. So we knew we needed to make a common data format in order to scale the product and scale it with quality. So there are two aspects to the scaling. One is that we need to make sure that the amount of effort we put in to add a new city to the product is very low. Because our ambition was to provide public transit information to every single person in the whole world. Because Google has universal missions. That sounded like a cool mission. Let's do it. Not just Portland, but the whole world. So we needed to be able to, basically to be free in terms of human labor to ingest a new city's data. And so, of course, you need a data format for that. You also want to be able to do that with quality. And so, so it's very important to have a very well-defined format that allows you to build tooling on top of that format to verify the quality of the data. For example, common errors that we would see in the early days would be bus routes that seem to go backwards in time because there's an error in the data. Weird rounding errors having to do with going past midnight. Not properly taking into account daylight savings time. The names of the stops didn't make any sense. They would put the same route in twice because just the data wasn't necessarily clean. So in addition to GTFS, we soon afterwards published a collection of tools that would allow you to view the data and find errors in it, and then take action to fix the errors in the data. And the key is that the errors need to be fixed at their source. They can't be fixed by Google because we don't have the resources to do that. Even a Google company as rich as Google can only be profitable if we can automate as much of this information as possible. So that's the reason for GTFS. But there's another hidden reason. Not only were we scaling, but we were avoiding proprietary lock-in. Part of the pitch of the product was that we don't want you to give money we don't want you to give your data to Google. We want you to give your data to the citizens. The citizens should have this data. There's no reason not to give it to them so that they can do interesting things with it. We already anticipated potential uses like research projects that want to find out how often the bus is going by this location so they can estimate the correlation between bus service and how often people walk between places. All sorts of things like that. And so in general, to establish an ecosystem for innovation. So at the time we launched it, we added more cities, we had this GTFS format. We intentionally put out a site that described the format and described it as a specification. It was actually called the Google Transit Feed Specification at the time. The name has since changed in a very clever way. We changed Google into general. So now it's the General Transit Feed Specification. We established, we just invented a Google group at which you could discuss the specification and whether you wanted to add to it or whether you were building a product based on it so that you could connect to other people with like interests. And at the same time, we were providing direct value to Google Maps because the map was now more complete. Turns out that as you scale beyond the United States, public transit matters a whole lot more in most of the world than it does here. And so it became a key differentiator for the product. So not only was it, you know, in my opinion, good for society and the planet, open, but it also helped Google's business. So Google Transit is now worldwide. It powers many transit apps. A lot of the transit apps you'll see in the Apple App Store or in Google Play or websites related to it are actually based on GTFS. And the same thing goes, I believe, for research. Okay, new challenges. So is everything solved? Did we just, you know, fix it and now everybody rides the bus whenever it makes sense for them? Sometimes that they do. I don't actually know of any studies that have looked at the question of when this transit information became easier to access on your phone in your city, did more people ride the bus? If you know of a study, I'd be interested to see it. But anecdotally, I talk to people all the time who say, wow, this thing really helped me out. It's really useful. So that's nice to hear. So, you know, we're not the only game in town. We're not the only ones who noticed. I wasn't the only one who noticed that you can use information and computers and whatever to do better at some business model. Uber is another great example that has really upended the transportation landscape and created a new category where there was like some sort of taxi category before, but it didn't work particularly well, and now it's, as everybody knows, a big thing. Another one that I would classify in the same is delivery logistics to your home. A lot of trips to a big box store or someplace to get something don't happen anymore. And now you just go on and you order the thing, and then somehow, even later in the same day, it just shows up at your house. Electric cars. So, you know, I ranted a little bit, I sort of ranted a little bit earlier about the internal combustion engine and how it might be screwing the world up and how suburbs are somehow related to that. But what if electric cars come? What does that mean? Is that going to solve everything or not? It definitely reduces the carbon if you can get that power from a solar panel. And then, of course, self-driving cars. This is a picture of a Google-branded self-driving car. So on the other hand, there's also like even more things. There's bike share and scooter share and dockless scooter share and dockless bike share, which have exploded. And the reason that those technologies are even feasible is because of computing. In fact, going back to Uber, the reason, so Uber is not built just on cell phones, and it's not based just on the internet. It requires wireless connections, the cell phone, and basically Google Maps to have already completed the map. It doesn't need to have completed the map in terms of transit, but the fact that there were easy-to-use base layer mapping providers that could say, your Uber is not like on the screen in some weird dot way. It's like on this specific location in this street, and you could type in your address and everything would work correctly. And you could do routing of the driver to the location they needed to go. All of that was not actually possible before these mapping systems came to be. And same thing with bike share. To find the bike share location, you need that base map. Or even for a scooter that's like dumped in a random alley, to find that alley, you have to, or on a hiking trail, apparently. They find them on hiking trails. Or even congestion pricing. Congestion pricing used to not really be possible unless you had people throwing quarters in a toll booth. Now you can automate the whole thing. So maybe it's sort of painless for people to pay a little bit more or a lot more if they want to go into a certain place that only admits so many cars. So again, the common thread is data centers, the huge power of computing, the miniaturization of computing, and public policy. So in the case of Uber, for example, the government decided, kind of on purpose, not to allow Uber to be a more or less unregulated taxi. And things resulted. Also sure about Amazon. But Tesla and electric cars and renewable energy are extremely subsidized. Not extremely these days. They are definitely subsidized by the government. The US government, for example, gave a huge loan in the past to Uber in the early days to help them bootstrap. And they also give gigantic discounts when you buy an electric car. Same thing here. Self-driving car, the laws clearly say you have to be a person to drive a car, but now they're changing the law. How do they change the law? How should they change the law to encourage the right outcomes? Okay. Similarly here, and of course congestion pricing is entirely a government-run endeavor. So what risks from the future can I see that might necessitate a Google Transit GTFS-like solution that won't take that form, but maybe could be solved by one of you in this room? The first is something that I would call the self-driving car potential apocalypse. The problem is, if you have self-driving cars, you have decoupled the car from the person, and therefore the number of miles driven is not limited by the number of miles ridden by a person, and therefore you might have an order of magnitude more car miles driven per year. And what does that mean? If you can just like take your dog, put it in the car, and tell it to drive to the other side of the country just because you can. Is that a good thing? Should we allow that? What are the implications of that? I mean, maybe the dog one going cross country is not going to happen very often, but I don't think it's very far-fetched to say, oh, I was just at my buddy's house and he left his phone in my bag, and rather than driving back to his house 30 minutes away to give it to him, I'll just put it in the self-driving car and tell it to take that phone over to him. I think that could be there could be some pretty bad outcomes there. Rideshare has shown itself to be inefficient in terms of climate as well as congestion relative to other things. You've probably seen the recent studies showing that the most recent one I saw claimed that they had a correlation of minus 1.5% per year cumulative negative impact on public transit usage of Uber and Lyft, which means that over the course of a few years, you get like 10-15% fewer people riding the bus and more people driving around in Uber and Lyft, which is not good for congestion. It's not good for the climate or anything. And then, exclamation mark, climate change. So that's it. I just have one more final slide. Thank you for having me here. I think Berkeley is going to be a big part of the solution. It always is. Berkeley is an extremely innovative city, an extremely innovative university, and a lot of the things that are the good things we think about the world we're in sometimes originate here. This is an example that I'm very proud of that recently happened on Hearst Avenue. There are now these green bike lanes that you would think is pretty simple, but it's actually kind of a watershed moment to the city. Thank you. We should Q&A, I guess.
Is there any city which doesn't have GTFS in 2019? Or I'm sure some don't because they're tiny, but any numbers of the magnitude of where the system is now?
The question was, are there any cities that don't have GTFS? The answer is yes. So you can actually go to google.com/transit and it tells you the list of every single city for which we have data. There are a number of cities where we don't. And I'll give you one example of a city, a major city, that didn't until recently, and some of the story why. That city's Paris. Paris recently did, in the last 2 or 3 years, come on board, and now you can find the buses and the subway and stuff. But they didn't for a very long time, and I think it had to do with perceptions of outsiderness or concern about competition from the government of France. Yeah. So, you know, these things actually happen. It's a continuous process. You know, they say Rome wasn't built in a day. These days, people like expect things to happen quickly, but they really don't. Google Maps, to get where it is today, has been a very long process. It started out in 2005, and if you went back today and looked at the product as it was then, it's missing so many features that are there today, the data sets, everything. And it's the same thing with application of new technology like GTFS. It just takes time for people to be comfortable with it and to adopt it. Yes?
To what extent do you tie into local 511s or MPO modeling efforts?
511s or?
Or the MPOs build extensive network models that include transit for their planning apps.
Okay.
And,
I'm not sure what an MPO is, I'm
observe that
sorry.
The paths that you build aren't something that VZoom or Cube would do. Sometimes it looks pretty weird.
I see. You're saying that the lines we draw on the screen are not the same.
They're not only not the same, but they don't make sense sometimes.
Yep. So the data Google gets is what is provided by the transit agency.
So you don't, I mean, five years ago, we were looking into 511 for San Joaquin, and we tried to see if there was any tie to GTFS, and there wasn't at the time.
Right.
And it seems to me that would be a great asset if you could combine resources.
Yeah. I mean you're talking about the Amtrak, right? By San Joaquin, is that what you mean?
Well, not just Amtrak, but like from San Joaquin, they have a lot of commuters in the Silicon Valley or
Oh, I see.
Sacramento.
Yeah.
So they need an interregional tie-in.
Yes, and the product supports that. It's just a matter of people feeling, of the relevant owners of the data feeling comfortable putting it into the system. Yes, in the back, red shirt.
Have you been following the development of the Los Angeles data mobility specification, LAMBS, that's right? Or have any thoughts about how emerging mobility fits into a framework like this? How can we create a standard so that all of these emerging mobility companies share the data in ways to verify?
Yep. I think your question was, have I looked into an effort in Los Angeles to make a mobility data standard and ways that can be shared with everybody?
Yeah.
What kind of mobility data are you talking about?
LAMBS aims, they have a pretty broad scope, but
Yeah.
scooters, bike share, I think they include.
You mean like the locations of the scooters, for example, stuff like that?
They're looking for trip data specifically.
Trip data, okay.
Origin, destination data. Just trying to figure out a way, trying to create a data specification similar to GTFS so that these companies can share data with governments effectively.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any opinion on another. I mean, I don't have any more. Yeah, I think it's all great to share this information. I mean, statistical data on trips, you got to make sure it's anonymous, of course, but like where the data, where people can ride, even where the bikes are in real time is a very useful feature for many applications.
Let's go follow up just on this question. So Uber recently introduced in their maps the feature points, which are designated pickup points that you don't see, but that the maps forces you by projecting you onto it.
Okay.
Now this is Uber specific, probably Lyft and others.
Right.
The same thing. Is that something that would benefit from a similar standard? Because it's a map attribute that is hidden.
Yeah, but maybe there's a relation with local governmental regulation as well, that there be designated rideshare pickup points, and that's where you have to go. There's a question on the right side.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So have you, like in the early stage, has Google make any active outreach for the cities saying that
faith is the standard of
Oh yes.
or it's like
Oh yes. We had and continue to have full-time people who do nothing but try to sell it. We're not selling it in the sense of people paying for it, but like explaining why it's a good thing. Yeah. And real time is a new thing that was added since I left the project. There's a GTFS real-time spec, which looks a lot different, but the concept is you get where the bus is right now. Yes.
Do you have anything on NextBus? I don't know much about it, but it was presented to me as a competitor to GTFS.
Okay. Your question. Yeah. The question is, what do I think about NextBus? Is it a competitor? What is it?
Describe it, or
So NextBus is they provide a portal where you can get real-time bus and train arrivals for the people that buy the NextBus service, and they also provide a service to the agencies to collect the data from the buses themselves. They have GPS transponders and wireless things that they sell to the agencies to put on their bus and then put it into the database, and then they in turn can syndicate that data to third parties like Google potentially. So it's not a competitor to the standard. I would call them like they're not an aggregator because they also provide the technology. So, yeah. Yeah. In the green shirt, please.
Or I visited Athens, it turned out that the taxi companies incorporated their Uber. We didn't feel like a competitor, we feel like it's a combining the feature that will provide more service. And it seems to work very well when we tried it.
To combine taxis with Uber?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's
Yeah, where you tell us all Uber and
okay.
taxi.
Okay. Yeah, it seems like. What was your question?
Oh, my question's maybe a little broader. I think this has not been a good year for Facebook and Google in terms of public perception and
Yeah.
The mission statement you put on maybe 5 years ago, people would have just kind of taken that without skepticism, but
Yeah.
a lot of people view that as
Sure.
just
Yeah.
kind of a camouflage for just make as much money as possible.
Right.
And my question is, what was your perception of that as you were working on this? Did you feel that was the business case obvious? Is there a business case in terms of Google's profits, or
Yeah.
was it really, as in this particular case, as idealized as that mission suggests?
I think in this case, there is a business model that makes sense and that is profitable, and it fits perfectly with Google's mission.
Can you say a little bit about the business model?
Advertising.
Okay, but
Google makes
more
most of its.
specifically, how does
The more, the better your search results, the more people will trust your search engine and use it, and then we make money from advertisers who wish to advertise alongside the search results. That's the business model. Yes, please.
This might be a very general question as well. So, as you said, Berkeley is a hub for innovation and in many ways analogous to Google. And as we can imagine, there must be a lot of competing projects seeking resource and support. So I'm wondering if you have any tips for how to push through your idea and either internally or make it widely known in the industry.
So you're saying how can you best advocate? You're asking, I think, how can you best advocate for your idea among the sea of ideas that exist, so that it gets funded? Is that the question?
Basically.
Okay. It's not so easy. It wasn't super easy to get this project off the ground because there are many things that a company can do. Especially in the early days of the tech space, there's just like, at the time it seemed like there was an infinite number of things to do that could be funded, and we only had so many people and so much time and so on. So I think you need to, what's what advice can I give? You need to make your case clearly. You need to speak the language of the people you're talking to. For example, like maybe I care about whether people are riding the bus and have the information needed to decide whether they want to ride the bus, but the vice president person who needs to approve the project, that's not top of mind for them. Maybe they think it's, okay, cool, people ride the bus, that's cool, I don't care. But they're thinking about something else. So if you can speak their language about what it is they care about and how your idea correlates with what they care about, then you'll get their attention. Yes, please.
I have a question about the future. So you mentioned the ride sharing now is at any impact of 1.5 or 2% of
Yes.
the ridership.
Yes.
So in the future, maybe ride hailing or ride sharing will keep eating the market share of transit in the future if the two modes will converge on something. Uber is developing Uber shuttle service. So in the future, the transit service itself will be on demand, and that makes transit more flexible from traditional
Yeah.
scheduled service. So how you will view the current Google GTFS data will respond to this kind of evolution?
Right. I think the question was, maybe the situation will evolve where fixed route transit is less of a thing and it's more of an on-demand concept. If that happens, then I think something new needs to be developed to represent that information properly. Yep. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about, after working with Portland, what it was like to get other cities to actually, share their information
Mm-hmm.
in GTFS and your kind of readiness for it and what that process looked like?
Okay. Yeah. The question was, what was the process like after Portland? Because we didn't have to try with Portland; they just came to us. There were a number of other cities that were kind of just as eager, but I would say that none had the combination of eagerness and technical know-how that they did. Pretty much none. And so they might have been eager, but their like IT system was a little bit behind, or they didn't have the person who was an expert on that, who had time to work on it or something. So some of the strategies to overcome all this, the IT thing, for example, we actually partnered with, public transportation has a whole array of companies that sell services. Like NextBus sells services to the bus companies. There are all these companies that sell database and asset tracking and whatever, and all the stuff that you use to generate your schedule. It's all, they don't build it themselves. They buy it from companies. And so we partnered with those companies to provide export functionality into GTFS, so that pretty much no matter who you were at some point, if you wanted to give the data to the citizens and Google, then you could add the feature to that software and press a button and then it's done. Yes, please.
Now, what was the problem with Portland you mentioned that I couldn't figure out what the issue was?
The issue? Oh, Portland was the initial city with whom we worked.
Oh,
In the initial launch of Google Transit as a labs product, it was just one city. It was just Portland, Oregon.
okay.
And that in the data format from Portland basically is GTFS. They already had their data in that format more or less. And we massaged it a little bit and then published it with their collaboration. Yeah.
It worked out okay.
I'm sorry?
It worked out okay?
I think so. Yes, please.
Thanks for your presentation, Chris. I really admire a lot of work you've done.
Thank you.
This is not easy to do.
Thank you.
But I have another question, or I have a question in addition to a comment.
Okay.
So,
Two-part question.
well, yeah, first part was saying you're a great guy. Yeah, part two is right, is I think one of the fundamental questions a lot of us are facing in transportation right now is what's going to happen to public transit.
Yep.
What's the role of public transit? What's the role of the public sector? What's the role of the private sector?
Yep.
As somebody who I think is on the side of public transit,
Yep.
given what I've seen your work is all about,
Yep.
how do you think it's going to evolve and how do you think it should evolve?
How is it going to evolve? I'm not sure. Kind of worried about it.
Me too.
One good sign is, I could like come up with data to help myself feel better. For example, apparently Lyft and Uber subsidize more than half your ride, last I checked, with investor money, and that eventually will run out, and they need to raise prices. But on the other hand, they're probably betting that they can transition to driverless cars by that time, before the investor money runs out, and then they will reduce the price of their service dramatically. And then, so we'll transition from the negative 1.5% to the self-driving car apocalypse. Maybe. On the other hand, I don't think that they scale. It fundamentally does not scale. There was a person who was telling me stories of Bogota, where they have these BRT buses that run like every minute or even less on the streets, and it's like a great success for BRT and a worldwide famous system. But it has limits, just like every system. And if you exceed those limits, then the system no longer scales beyond it. And with cars, it's very clear that that limit is an order of magnitude less than for BRT. And so the whole... Yeah, right, so a subway. So like it's not rocket science, it's numbers, it's adding and subtracting. And I think the whole thing is very strongly connected to housing. The whole thing is connected. Transportation is not an island, nor is housing, and the whole thing is extremely connected. A big part of the reason we have such a housing crisis, in my opinion, is that we have a transportation network that fails to scale beyond a certain number of suburban-style experiences. And you can't build more than a certain number because the numbers don't work out. There's an n-squared problem in terms of road capacity needed in a metropolitan area with the n is the number of people that live there, and you just fundamentally can't do it. And so I think the American cities are now against that limit and maybe have exceeded it, and they're all realizing it, and so there will be a change that has to happen kind of, I think, by necessity. So I think we're out of time, right?
Yes.
I will be able to stay if you want to talk more, but thank you.